the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 177. Sometimes I think to myself I might be having a stroke because there have been a lot. I feel like over the last couple of weeks, there have been so many times where I'm speaking with a client. And listen, maybe I'm just, not doing the 8 million lessons I used to do. So like now it's just like I'm not as fresh.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm having a stroke, but I find myself speaking and then like it's like the words can't come out at the same speed as I'm thinking them in my brain. And I just like, I feel myself just like randomness comes out, Yeah.
That's how I feel every time we're on this podcast. I like have exactly what I want to say. And then I listen back to it when I'm editing and I'm just like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's the worst.
I feel like I probably should just focus on like slowing myself down a little bit,
When you get heated, you do,
I should just
start
talk a little bit slower
Yeah.
and just like, I feel like that is a skill, right? Like you hear these like well-spoken individuals or like people that give these presentations and stuff. And I'm being very conscious of this right now. I'm trying to talk slowly and precisely, right?
Yeah.
But there's no like fluff in their words. There's no stumbling over them. It's really clear. Everything seems very well thought out. There's no constant like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like they're able to just put together their points really clearly. And I feel like sometimes, maybe if I was able to do that, maybe I'd get my message across a little bit better.
Maybe.
But maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah. A little Dr. Phil,
Little Dr. Phil. All right, guys. So our last two podcast episodes that we did, we were looking at Ivan's newest study. We were discussing Ivan's newest study.
Yep.
And we were, kind of providing our criticism / opinions on it. You guys can go watch part 1 and part 2 of that, where we read the entire 28-page study, gave our opinions on it. It sparked some really great conversation in the comment section from people, which I liked. So far, the part 1 on it, I think, has like 1,500 views on YouTube. Like it's doing very well. I think people are very interested to learn more about it, stuff like that. But anyways, as we were reading through it, I was presented with a term that I did not know much about, right? And that was the term of the life model. So obviously, I am familiar with the LIMA model, least invasive, minimally aversive, which I believe we've spoken about on this podcast before. But this one I had never really heard of. So we're going to do some learning together here. I haven't researched it at all since. I wanted to kind of research it in real time. And basically, I just tried to find whatever I thought the most like reputable source of information on it was. This is from the Journal of Veterinary Behavior, which I believe is like a journal or a publication that's quoted very frequently as obviously they're, this governing body of scientific knowledge in the behavior space and this and that. So I figured this will probably be the closest thing to, an accurate depiction of this life model as we're going to get. This is also, again, written in like very article or study format, just like this one. So we'll kind of have to weed through it a little bit, see what we get, and kind of go from there. We'll kind of learn about it, give our takes on it.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about life.
Okay, so like I said, this is from the Journal of Veterinary Behavior, the least inhibitive, functionally effective life model, a new framework for ethical animal training practices. That is the title of this. So if I had to just give my assumption based on least inhibitive, functionally effective model, what I think this is going to wind up being is basically a study of, we know that people tend to get dogs that are the wrong fit for them, right? They get herding dogs and they get mad when the herding dog is trying to herd their children around the living room, right? They get guardian breeds and then they get mad that the dog is resource guarding their food bowl or being very territorial of their home or any of those types of things. And then they try to just address that problem, inhibit the problem of these natural things that these dogs want to do, right? My assumption of what this is going to be is this is going to be a framework of solving behavioral issues with dogs that are rehearsing inappropriate behaviors, but behaviors that are still true to what they're bred for. And basically, my assumption of this before knowing anything about it is it's going to be a process of finding ways to give these dogs these outlets for these things they want to do in appropriate places so they don't feel the need to rehearse them, obviously, in their home environments, which would get to the least inhibitive of like, how can we solve these behavioral issues without inhibiting them, without creating these inhibitions where the dog just can't do them, by giving them the outlets for it, but making sure it's like functionally effective. I interpret as like, it's not going too out of your way to solve those problems. It's figuring out things you could add into your day-to-day that like satiate these needs that the dog has, without just squashing them, basically. Just my guess. I don't know. We'll find out, right? So this article came out in 2023, so it's actually fairly new here. So this is this just says the abstract of it. The ethics of animal training procedures have seen dramatic changes in the last few decades with a movement towards reward-based training methods. These reward-based training practices have also been directly impacted by the behavioral and animal welfare sciences, including their research outputs. In the last couple of decades, the least intrusive, minimally aversive, so the Lima model of animal training, has been used to describe reward-based animal training methods. However, a number of problems were built into the creation of Lima and continue to exist today, including A, a lack of clarity in its terminology, B, ambiguity in desired training approaches, and C, a history of aversive training methods justification. An alternative approach is therefore proposed, and one that specifies 1, increasing choices by inhibiting less, 2, the importance of function, and 3, defining success as more than simply being effective. The result is the least inhibitive, functionally effective approach to ethical animal training methods. Life is discussed in terms of its connection to established terminology, behavioral principles, and training practices, as well as its ability to promote optimal welfare for the animals under our care and in our lives. So basically what they're saying is they created this because Lima, however the fuck you want to pronounce it, the flaws that came with it is in the least invasive, minimally aversive. When you break that down, basically what it's saying is when we're trying to solve something, we use as little force and invasiveness as possible that is needed to solve the problem. But that does give some room for interpretation of, well, the force-free approach is not working, so we could start adding in the use of aversives in a way where as minimal of an aversive as we could use in order to stop this behavior, right? So it does justify, under some circumstances, the use of aversives, which, though I think the idea of Lima in practice is fairly good, like if we could look at certain things and say, hey, like let's try to find a more gentle approach of doing this. But if we need to resort to the use of aversives, we will, obviously. That sounds pretty logical to me, And though there's some flaws as far as like when you're creating inhibitions for things, like by always starting at like the least invasive and minimally aversive use, you could actually require the use of more force later on, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, the agenda of the veterinary behavior camp in the force-free community is that aversives are bad all the time. So we can't have anything
100%.
that leaves any room for interpretation that there ever would be a use of aversives. Right? So I'm assuming this one is worded a little bit more clearly where, it says no aversives ever. Hold, please.
We're all about life.
All right, so let's get into this. This is the introduction. In the last few decades, this is really testing my eyesight here. I have pretty good eyesight, but I'll tell you, when I'm reading words that are just like increasingly getting smaller and smaller, sometimes I'm like, maybe a magnifying glass would be nice. In the last few decades, we have observed major changes in the ethics and application of modern animal training practices. For instance, we have seen formalized descriptions of reward-based or force-free training methods, including detailed plans to use such procedures. Researchers have examined and compared the use of reinforcement-based training protocols to traditional training methods that rely on aversive tools, such as shock collars, with the former more typically outperforming the latter. So basically what they're saying is they've proven that reward-based training methods are better than aversive-based training methods, which if you go to the part 1, we broke down a lot of the studies that have been done up until this point, found a lot of flaws in them, and in addition to that, found some where that actually was not the case. So, we'll just leave that there.
Yeah.
We have seen documented demonstrations of the ability with which reward-based principles can be applied to modify animal behavior ethically, reliably, and voluntarily, including with exotic animals in zoos. While clear changes in both the practices and philosophy of modern animal training procedures have occurred, there have also been 2 major hurdles for continued progress. 1, resistance from traditional or balanced trainers that regularly rely on aversive tools, and 2, a lack of coherent and concise model to detail the important features of ethical animal training practices. The former problem is expected as resistance to change is a common obstacle for any proposed modification to any field. The latter, however, can create considerable problems, particularly if a proposed model to describe some philosophical approach is not simple and clear enough to convey the important and necessary information. Therefore, a critical feature for effectively describing modern animal training and behavior change procedures should be a simple framework that connects theory, science, and practice. In other words, the framework should accurately detail both how to think about and do ethical animal training. So basically they're saying, though they've found in studies, and they use the example all the time of exotic animals in zoos, that force-free training can be very effective in altering behavior, which that is absolutely not incorrect.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, you can do a lot with a force-free approach with exotic animals in zoos, right? And when you set up your studies in a very particular way, as we even described with Ivan's study, you can prove just about any point that you want.
Yeah.
Right? They are still having a hard time having people fall into line with it and follow these methods. And I think that's because people like myself and other people can recognize that, again, the flaws in the studies. 2, regarding exotic animals. I saw Ivan was on a podcast with Dr. Melanie that was on our podcast, obviously. And they were talking about exotic animals and the force-free approach with them. And Ivan was basically like, I don't care what you're doing with exotic animals, because every time you show us you drawing blood from a lion or, doing a nail trim on a freaking giraffe or whatever, you're behind a fucking steel wall.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, if you want to show me how your methods are effective with those exotic animals out in the fucking savannah in Africa or whatever, he's like, yeah, I'll pay attention then, because that would be the real world of the animals, no different than how the dogs are in the real world.
Yeah.
He said, but up until that point, it is still just theory.
Yeah.
Right? It hasn't been proven in actual application then. And notice again how they only brought up those 2 things. There is a serious lack of that same success in the real world.
Yeah.
Because every time they say, oh, you could do it, let's see some proof of it, they lean back to studies and exotic animals in zoos. Very, very rarely do you see real life results.
Yeah. 100%.
So that's why they're having people have a hard time falling into line with it. Anyways, this paper introduces a new model or approach for thinking about ethical animal training practices. This is accomplished in 3 sections. 1, a brief history of animal welfare and training, important features about how we arrived at the current animal training ethics state of affairs. 2, a critical inspection of one of the more common approaches used in describe force-free training, the least intrusive, minimally aversive model. And 3, the premise for a new approach, the least inhibitive, functionally effective framework for animal training. The primary purpose of this paper is to detail the philosophy behind the life approach to training practices, as well as provide a practical set of guidelines for applying this conceptual framework. So, we are going to get into a brief history of welfare and training. In the following section, I briefly describe some of the events that helped form both the modern animal welfare and force-free training movements. Other papers provide more detailed information on the history of animal welfare and animal training. In addition, Figure 1 outlines some of the intersection of major historical animal welfare, and animal training events. So basically, they had like a little graph here.
Oh, okay.
Animal welfare can be thought of as a way of describing a measurable quality of a living animal. The modern animal welfare movement has been greatly influenced by two major events. One, the creation of the 5 freedoms model, and 2, the progression of the freedoms model to become the 5 domains model. The 5 freedoms model was initially inspired by writings such as Harrison's Animal Machines, originally published in 1964, and from the Bramble Report of 1965, and later developed by the Farm Animal Welfare Council. While this was a major step forward for the welfare of animals, the primary focus of the 5 freedoms model was on avoiding negative experiences, or freedoms from events. It was the latter 5 domains model that would move to assessing welfare based on positive indicators, including a life worth living. The 5 domains model was updated in 2020 to include consideration of human-animal interactions, which necessarily incorporates how we manage the behavior of animals through training practices. Same deal. I'm actually not familiar with the 5 freedoms model or the 5 domains model. So those are going to be other things I have to add to the list. Let me circle up here. 5 domains model. 5 freedoms model.
I wonder if I could find a quick thing on it.
Yeah. We'll look. This is a pretty short article, so we might have time to get into those as well after this.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, I look at this, right off the rip, not knowing anything about these, but basically the 5 freedoms model was on avoiding negative experiences, which I think we all can argue is a fantastic thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, we want to be amplifying the positive experiences
Yeah.
and de-amplifying the negative experiences, or if there's negative experiences that, in my opinion, are either unwarranted or easily worked through, we want to get past them as quick as possible to create more positive experiences.
Quickly, the 5 freedoms are to stand up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs. That was like the basis for the 5 freedoms.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to look more into that because I'm curious how that ties into this, obviously.
For sure.
Okay. Animal training can be defined by respondent and operant conditioning procedures used to elicit, evoke, or emit behavior. The modern animal training movement can also be said to have started from 2 major events. 1, Skinner's discovery of shaping, and 2, the creation of a field of applied animal psychology by Keller and Marion Burland. Both of these events were directly connected to Project Pigeon, where between 1940 and 1943, Skinner and the Brelands trained pigeons to guide bombs as part of the war effort. Project Pigeon was so impactful that the Brelands left their academic studies to pursue animal training careers, which resulted in the creation of animal behavior enterprises, IQ Zoo, and some of the first dolphin training shows. Critical to the Brelands' training efforts were their public demonstrations of how positive reinforcement could be used to train almost any behavior. The movement to select rewards over coercive teaching and training methods was made more public through the efforts of an ex-dolphin trainer, Karen Pryor, who would publish one of the most influential books on reinforcement principles to date, Don't Shoot the Dog, which is a very, very popular book. And even for balance trainers, it's a great book. Similarly, this preference for reward-based learning was also put forward in academic works such as Sidman's Coercion and Its Fallout. Following the turn of the century, other major historical events included Pryor's creation of Clicker Expo, one of the first conferences for reward-based animal trainers. Friedman's article on assessing training methods beyond being effective, see later life section, and Lindsay's creation of the Lima model. So basically, they're talking about how force-free training came to be.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously,
history.
Skinner did a lot of work with, learning how to shape things. So he was one of the creators of teaching how you could utilize markers in order to teach animals how to do different things, which in this case wound up being pigeons guiding bombs. Very impressive, obviously.
Yeah.
turned into, obviously, Karen Pryor took the reins with it, and Gary Wilkes. Quick plug. Go see the Gary Wilkes versus Karen Pryor episode we did to find out a little bit about the history of that, obviously.
Yeah.
And some places where Karen Pryor wasn't exactly as positive as she came out to be. But anyways, and obviously, dolphin training, same deal. Animals in confinement, right?
Yeah.
And this whole concept that, you could use rewards to teach things. Like, we don't have to teach everything with every single dog using force, which I think everybody can agree with at this point, right? Though I've got no problem using force to teach some things where I need to if you have a dog that isn't motivated enough.
Yeah.
Positive reinforcement is a beautiful thing. I remember when I first got into dog training, and my introduction into dog training initially was using basically just like Keeler method style training, right? So just leash and prong collar, shaping behavior, stuff like that. Made a ton of progress. It was great.
Yeah.
From there, I kind of transitioned to, we'll say, a sloppy force-free approach, because I started working with a couple of different local trainers that were in the force-free camp, but they weren't very successful at it,
Heard.
So it was cool, but there was definitely some limitations to it. And then I transitioned from that to, I tell everybody all the time, basically the competitive, balanced dog training approach, which was like the Michael Ellis style of training, the power of training dogs with food.
Yeah.
And again, I remember when I first saw that and I realized how much drive and motivation you can create with dogs, I started realizing how far you can get with a reward-based approach, how much enthusiasm you can get, how fast you can teach things, stuff like that. My mind was like blown, right?
Yeah.
And I remember there was another trainer at the time that I knew that was in more of like the old school kind of yank and crank method. And I was kind of like, man, I just started getting into this. Like, this is crazy, like this reward-based approach. And they kind of just scoffed it off as this it's fucking cookie trainers,
Cookie trainer.
Like there was no even acceptance at all of, you could use rewards in a very effective way without getting so extreme with it that you're like the force-free trainer that's like anti the use of any of this.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember just being like, no, like this is these people are onto something. Like, this is awesome. And not that I think I got in at the exact time. Like, all this stuff had been created for a long time prior to me getting involved in it. But I really do genuinely feel like 12 years ago when I started getting involved in it, because it's been almost that long at this point, that was really a big turning point that I got into dog training, where people were finally starting to accept this style of training, where now it's common practice that a lot of people understand markers and using motivation and all of that, obviously. Yeah. But at that time, it was not, So, there was, I read these types of studies, and I promise I'm not trying to be all, critical of them all the time. But, I read these, and these are great advancements in the dog world. Yeah. These, the force-free approach, people like Karen Pryor and, Don't Shoot the Dog and Skinner and all these people, they really did do a very good thing for the dog world. Yeah. The problem is they took it too far,
Okay.
So whatever. So it's fantastic. I don't think anybody in the world is denying that positive reinforcement can be used to train behaviors very effectively when you have a dog that's motivated enough for what you're trying to teach them. Yeah. Right? No. So anyways, let's move on. So you get into then the least intrusive, minimally aversive model, so Lima. So obviously this ended where, the article on assessing training methods beyond being effective, and Lindsay's 2005 creation of the Lima model. So this came out in 2005. So Lima was first described in Lindsay's 2005 third volume of his Handbook of Applied Dog Behavior and Training series. Over the last 18 years, Lima has become one of the most commonly used ways for force-free trainers to describe their training practices. In addition, Lima has been used to describe codes of ethics, industry standards, position statements, and standards of practice by the Joint Standards of Training Organizations. There's a lot of standards in that.
Yeah.
Which include the Association for Pet Dog Trainers, the Certification Council for Pet Dog Trainers, the International Association for Animal Behavior Consultants, and the Karen Pryor Academy. Lima has therefore come to represent a broad approach of training methods that minimize, if not altogether avoid, the use of aversive training tools, which include shock, choke, and prong collars used in dog training practices. While Lima has proven useful as a simple means for generally describing a force-free training philosophy, there are several concerns with this approach, which include 1. A lack of clarity in the terminology used, 2. ambiguity in desired training approaches, and 3, a history of justifying aversive training methods. So, first one here, the lack of clarity in the terminology used. This is their issue with Lima, obviously. Identifying procedures as being least intrusive is a focal point for proper Lima-based training methods. However, intrusive is a term that tells us little about the effect of any event on behavior. To say that something is an intrusion or intrudes on an individual does not describe the impact on how they overtly respond. Likewise, to say that some event is intrusive on behavior still tells us next to nothing on how it changes those responses. At best, intrusive is a term that requires additional operationalization. While a handful of behaviorists have used the term intrusive procedurally, for instance, see Carter and Wheeler, 2005, it is still problematic for describing any procedural effect. So basically what they're saying is least intrusive. So we know what being intrusive is, obviously. But just because something is intrusive, we don't understand the long-term impacts of being intrusive on the animal, of how it shapes the behavior and creates long-term issues. Next one, ambiguity in desired training approaches. The focus of the Lima model is on practices to limit. For instance, while it may not be clear what effect intrusive has, the Lima acronym tells us to have less of it. Likewise, Lima tells us to be minimal in our training method selection approach. What then should we do instead? For over half a century, the applied behavioral sciences have argued in favor of focusing on what individuals should do, not simply what they should not do. At least part of any force-free training philosophy should focus on criteria we ought to use. In other words, to be an effective and behaviorally friendly training model, it needs to inform what practices and behaviors to select for, not against. So that I could definitely agree with. Obviously it says, be less intrusive, be minimally invasive, right? Or minimally aversive, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, what do I do instead?
Yeah.
So I could get behind how that is faulty. Obviously, most times when you look at a model, like a Lima model, right? The people that are looking at that Lima model are going to be people that know generally what to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically saying, well, maybe instead of jumping right to the aversive or being more invasive, maybe let's look at where can we apply a force-free approach more precisely to try to stop that problem first before we go to that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of assuming a history of understanding methods a little bit more deeply. Okay. And then the last issue they had with it, history of aversive training methods justification. So one of the biggest problems for the Lima approach is the justification it has enabled for regularly using aversive stimuli or coercive training methods. Some of this is historical, which becomes more evident as we go back to Lindsay's original statements. For instance, and this is in parentheses, according to the least intrusive and minimally aversive model, aversives are ranked in terms of their relative severity and intrusiveness, requiring that the trainer apply a less aversive technique before advancing to a more aversive one. Thus, Lindsay was making an argument for the use of coercive training techniques, with his handbook providing pictures and descriptions of various aversive training tools. For example, in another description, Lindsay states, parentheses, or quotations, the proper use of a prong collar as a shaping and polishing tool requires significant instruction, but with respect to basic control uses, novel trainers can rapidly master the prong collar. What becomes clear in these statements is that Lima was not intended to be an attempt to minimize the use of aversive stimuli, as many modern force-free trainers have conceptualized. Instead, Lindsay intended Lima to be a framework to help trainers select their aversive stimuli and tools. As one of the latter statements in the handbook concludes, aversive procedures are legitimate and valuable tools for controlling undesirable behavior. While Lima has been a useful, simple philosophy to help identify and describe a reward-based, force-free animal training approach, it also has the aforementioned drawbacks. Nonetheless, these criticisms should be viewed as ways to help the animal training field and force-free training philosophy move forward. All fields adjust their principles in order to advance, and progress is typically made by identification of what should be done next. Therefore, the section below details a potential new force-free training philosophy. So basically what they're saying is we can't have aversus. Exactly what I said at the beginning. We can't have any aversus.
Yeah, nothing.
So the fact that this implies that they could be useful, can't have it. Can't have it. Okay, so now we get into finally the actual model, right? So the least inhibitive, functionally effective model. There are several factors that any description of a force-free animal training model should incorporate. Specifically, these should include using terminology that is both representative of current training methods and the science behind it, recognition of both desired and undesired training practices, and identification of how we define success. This is addressed in 3 parts. 1, increasing choice by inhibiting less. 2, the importance of function. And 3, defining success as more than being effective. All 3 points should facilitate connecting training practices and the life model directly to modern animal welfare theory and evidence-based practice. So I'm curious about number 3, defining success as more than being effective. What does that mean to you, Josh?
I'm not really sure.
Take a guess. Defining success as being more than being effective.
I'm guessing what they mean by that is, even though it's not necessarily effective, you didn't harm or affect the dog in a negative way.
I think you're on to the same thing that I'm thinking, which is basically saying, though we might not be effective in achieving your goals, the welfare of the animal is always the priority. So we should be defining success as not being effective in stopping the reactivity or preventing this, or this, but we're providing a good life for the dog and satiating their desires regardless of if the improper behaviors are still there or if they need to be managed very heavily, is my initial interpretation.
That's what I'm thinking.
All right, so let's start the first one. Increasing choice by inhibiting less. As discussed earlier, the use of the term intrusive tells us little about how any training method either affects the targeted animal or its behavior. Historically, behaviorists have relied on 2 terms to identify some type of reductive impact on behavior. 1, restriction as specified in the least restrictive alternative, or the principle of least restrictiveness, and 2, inhibition, as detailed by the concept of conditioned inhibition and inhibitory stimuli effects. Both terms, while abstractly tell us only that behavior was prevented in some way, can also inform us about a reduction in available and meaningful choices. Our goal from a welfare perspective should be to maximize available choices that are beneficial to any animal. Additionally, behaviorists have used a similar concept in degrees of freedom to identify genuine choices. The concept of degrees of freedom, as presented within Goldman's constructional approach, can more generally be described as specifying the restriction or inhibition of behavioral repertoires either through a lack of options or through force or coercion. We could equally provide a more inhibitive environment by reducing meaningful choices or by applying aversive stimuli to force some responses. Note that in the first example, a trainer could say, but I only use positive reinforcement, even though their training practice may be inhibitive through environmental restriction. Choice, context, and function are all equally important parts of the life model. Did I lose you there, Josh?
A little bit towards the end there.
Okay. So, and again, this is a lot, right? I don't read these things all the time. Right? So I'm using my best to interpret this
please.
Alongside for everybody else. But the way I interpret this is choice is important, right? When dogs feel, or animals or humans or anybody feels like they have choice, right? Stress levels tend to come down, right? And it becomes easier to succeed.
Yeah.
Right? When you start relying on either inhibition or reduction in the form of utilizing aversives, you are eliminating one choice for sure, but you also are temporarily inhibiting choice in general, right? Sure. It's like, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stop making decisions because I don't know what the right decision is. That doesn't get me into trouble.
Heard.
Right? And basically they're implying this is a you could do it another way.
Yeah.
Right? But also, like they used in the example of a trainer that says, but I only use positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
Even though their training practice may be inhibitive through environmental restriction. So basically, severe management. They're never allowing the dog to make choices in general because they're never putting the dog in a position to make those choices, whether they're good ones or bad ones.
Okay.
Basically, they're saying both are wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't want to be suppressing or creating inhibitions for behaviors because it deters choice all in all, but we also don't want to manage things too intensely because then we never get past the problem, right? Because the dog never learns how to make proper choices as well.
True. Okay. I was going to say there for a second, I was like, wait, so nothing's right?
Yeah, right? So next, the importance of function. A cornerstone of many applied behavioral sciences, including animal welfare research and practice, has been a reliance on understanding and addressing the function of some behaviors. In the field of applied behavioral analysts, this has typically been done through the use of functional behavior assessments, which have included functional analysis. The critical feature here is that understanding of the function of some behavior is connected to our proposed behavior change plans, so that newly trained behaviors can serve the same function as the originally offered responses. In other words, our ability to identify what causes some behavior means we are more likely to successfully change it through appropriately matched contingencies. So as I said, giving them proper outlets for these behaviors.
Yeah.
For example, if a trainer knows that a dog gets attention for barking when the doorbell rings, they could both stop giving attention for barking in the presence of the ringing doorbell, so obviously stopping the reinforcement behind the behavior, and just as importantly, give attention for an alternative response, such as sitting quietly on a mat. This is where you get into, we're just training incompatible behaviors.
Yeah.
Right? So again, they're not managing it. They're not putting the dog somewhere where they can just fucking, not react to the doorbell, not run up to it, not get attention at all, right? Not put them in a position to rehearse it. But we're also not squashing behavior and telling them, don't do this. We're training an incompatible. This is a fancy way of saying we're training a incompatible behavior instead.
Yeah.
That serves the same function. The dog wants attention, so let's teach them a better way to get attention.
Yeah.
Where was I? Interventions such as rewarding an alternative response are reliant on matching our understanding of function to changing behavior. So obviously, it's not just training incompatible behaviors. It's training incompatible behaviors that still give the dog ultimately what they want, but in a more appropriate manner.
Okay.
But again, this is my whole problem with this. With this model, the dog still always gets what it wants.
Yeah.
No matter what. Like, why, like, I don't understand why it is so, like, frowned upon to just say, sometimes you just have to. Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you just might find.
I don't know.
Really?
I don't know it.
You get what you need.
You get what you need. Okay. All I know is you don't always get what you want.
I'm sure I mixed up a word or two in there, but whatever. Okay, anyways. We know what causes the response, so we could choose to deliver similar contingencies for different actions. It also illustrates why emphasizing the importance of function in our model is imperative, since knowledge of function means we are more likely to change behavior successfully and ethically. For instance, it moves us beyond a just ignore it protocol, which in the absence of rewarding other behaviors may not help. Extinction alone does not provide functional alternatives and has been associated with problem behaviors such as extinction bursts and aggression. We've talked about extinction bursts before on this.
Extinction bursts.
So again, noble theory. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, if the world really was that simple where it's like anything the dog wanted, we ultimately can give them in a more appropriate way. Like, without like restricting them from making the choices in general. Like, that would be great. But like, again, there's just so many examples of times where you don't have control over the thing that the dog ultimately wants.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't, right? Like, and you're going to be at the mercy of what everybody else does all the time. Like, you're out on your walk and your dog really wants to get to other people because it wants to interact with new people, right? And they pull towards other people and lunge and bark. So using this model, what we would have to do is we couldn't just ignore it. We couldn't just say, people ignore my dog. We would have to still give the dog the attention from strangers, which would basically mean every time your dog sees another person they want to get to, we would have to say, hey, person, you got 10 minutes to help me with my training so that we could sit here and I could wait till my dog rehearses some sort of incompatible behavior. Then you reinforce them because that's what they want right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you can't do it with everything. No. You just can't. No. Noble in theory. Yeah. Can't do it in practice with everything.
Right.
So that was the importance of function. And then the last one, defining success as more than being effective. So how we define success needs to be more than simply being effective. If we only define the success of any training procedure by whether it changes behavior or not, then any practice, ethical or not, cannot be deemed successful. Therefore, effectiveness should only be one component of training success in addition to connection to the function of behavior. We could think of the latter part of the life model as both independently important terms as well as essential when combined. In other words, function equals identification of cause, effect equals behavior change through training, and functionally effective means training ethically matching behavior change to its cause. Therefore, being functionally effective means identifying behavior function and using that knowledge to have an effect. Training success is defined by both being effective with our procedure and basing our procedure on an understanding and implementation of changes to the causal events. In addition, where ethics becomes critical is how any training procedure considers the effective training on the animal. Functionally effective also means how training overall affects animal welfare, including animal trainer interactions. This can and should include all welfare considerations, including affective states, natural histories, and the physical health of the animal. Force-free training as a philosophy should connect to our understanding of animal welfare, such as a result, means of having a better understanding of the animals with which we interact. Let me skim this one more time here before I give you my opinion on that.
Okay.
Yeah, if we only define the success of any training procedure by whether it changes behavior or not, then any practice, ethical or not, can be deemed successful. I understand what they're saying. So basically what they're saying is they want to define things by it changing behavior, but it has to change behavior and also be ethically sound in improving and satiating the dog's needs. So they're not saying it's okay if it doesn't work. They're saying it should work, but also if we're just saying it worked, then obviously the non-force-free approaches would work, creating inhibitions would work because it would solve the goal, but it also has to solve the goal in an ethical way is what they're saying. So conclusions. In the last few decades, we have witnessed a greater concern for the ethics of animal training procedures, which is likely generated by and generates continued welfare-minded animal training research. Our goal in driving future ethical animal training practices should be to provide models that directly connect to both science and practice. The new life framework fosters such a connection between the animal welfare and behavioral sciences, as well as current reward-based training practices. Another important concept of the life model is to rely on a simple yet accurate description of the critical features of modern ethical animal training practices. The acronym emphasizes the important points, including 1. Increasing meaningful choices, 2. Identifying behavioral functions, and 3. Maximizing training success. Parsimony in the model is reached by keeping the concepts as simple yet as accurate as possible. finally, continued research should be used to modify and expand on modern animal training models and applications. Scientific theory and practices are reliant on regular change, and ethical animal training practices should follow a similar path. It is up to us as welfare scientists and practitioners to adjust our training knowledge accordingly. That's what we got. That's the life model.
Interesting.
So, I understand it now. So basically, it's similar. I mean, so Lima, the what they are saying, the flaws with Lima is it gives permission to use aversives, right? And it's not clear of what to do.
Yeah.
Basically, in a nutshell, right? This approach solves that by basically saying you have to satiate the dog's needs. There's no use for aversives in it.
Yeah.
Right? Utilize the reinforcements of what the dog wants and find ways to channel them into more appropriate behavior so the dog learns they can get what they want if they act differently. That's basically it in a nutshell. And then they define success not just as what works in changing the behavior, but what works in changing the behavior and what is most ethically sound for the dog.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, it's like such a roundabout way of trying to work through your problems, but also giving your dog the power, I feel like.
I'm going to try to not judge harshly from I disagree with the force-free approach.
Sure.
Like obviously, we did that throughout it. Well, I think this is a more clear way of defining what force-free trainers are doing. The separate conversation would be it's faulty still.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get that. I mean, I feel like this is even like with like that saying, "Oh, you're a positive only trainer. But you're still doing it wrong because you're
choice." That was the other key component with it as well.
Yeah,
is
the choice.
Yeah, by putting the dog in a position to rehearse the improper decision and then learn new alternatives for it, you're giving them choice. You're teaching that. Don't choose this instead because it'll actually get what you want instead of just managing away all of your behaviors.
Yeah.
Never having the dog learn from it, which is an important key as well.
Yeah. What like, I mean, I guess what you said with like the people, like if you're on the walk with your dog, is that how you would like how they're saying you should train? Like if it like,
well, they're saying figure out why the dog is rehearsing the behavior.
Yeah.
It's because they want attention.
Okay.
And in that case, we could argue they specifically want the attention from another person, not from you, right?
Yeah.
So the reinforcement can't come from you then at that point. The reinforcement has to come from the place the dog wants it from, which would require you having control over the people around you.
Yeah.
In order for it to be effective, right? Which is just not real life.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why the studies of like zoo animals and stuff is so faulty because you can control every single interaction that a zoo animal in captivity has with absolutely anything, period.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't run those risks. So yeah, like if your zoo animal is, reacting at the zookeeper when they come in to try to clean something, it's like you have control over every variable there. Right?
Yeah.
You could set up a life approach to solve that problem then.
Yeah. Could you give an like let's say like a dog barks when people come in like into your house. So how would they?
Well, that's the example of what they used.
Yeah.
Right? So they want attention, right? So instead of them getting attention for jumping and barking when the people come in, they would train the animal to get onto a placeboard calmly and quietly.
Okay.
Then the attention would come then at that point from where they want it to come from.
Okay. Yeah, it's just so. It just seems so. I don't know. I don't know how to explain how I feel about it. I just feel like it's just
it's hard being somebody that has seen it done so many times in another way that's quick, that's effective, that solves the same problems.
Right.
That long term doesn't create any big problems or anything, right? To then look at this and be like, that's so complicated. Why would I do it that way?
Exactly.
Right? That's why it's hard as balanced trainers to read some of this kind of stuff because like all of our anecdotal data we have of the hundreds of clients we work with every year where we see this done in a different way and like we see them talk about like how detrimental some of these effects are on dogs and they act like the choice, like when you inhibit something you're going to deter choice forever. It's like you're not. Like it doesn't work that way. Like when I correct my dog for jumping, like I've used the example before of Waffles. So we got a big house plant in the corner of our living room and he used to take a bite out of it every time one of us would go into the other room. So we stopped and we corrected him really firmly with the e-collar for it. And sure, maybe for the rest of the day, like he just like didn't really mess with anything. He's like, I'm not making the choice to mess with anything right now.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's just, like that's just what it is.
It
right.
is,
So a temporarily inhibited choice.
Yeah.
But homeboy makes plenty of choices now. He's fine.
Yeah.
He just knows which choice not to make now at this point.
Exactly.
And
I feel like that overall, the if you're talking about welfare of the dog, that is for the greater good of the welfare of the dog.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because then it's like, he's never going to do that again. He's never going to eat shit that makes him sick.
Yeah.
I don't know. I get it, but I don't think it's the best choice.
Yep.
I'm guessing that's where you're at too. Like,
yeah,
it's
like
just
I said, it's I didn't know the terminology of it. Obviously, I wanted to understand a little bit more about it, but my opinions on it stand pretty similar. Let's see if we can find something real quick on those other two things.
Yeah,
The 5 freedoms model we'll talk about.
Yeah, and then was 5 freedoms, and it turned
5
into
domains.
5 domains is what it turned into, right? Yeah.
This was done at Michigan State University. All right, 5 freedoms model. Yeah, this is short, so we'll just read this here. Okay. The 5 freedoms have been the basis of animal welfare since the 1960s. Learn about what they are and why they have endured. Concern about animal care and welfare is not a new topic for those who raise animals, but it continues to be of greater concern for the general public. More and more people want to know and understand how animals, especially those raised to enter the food chain, are cared for, where and how these animals live, and what a modern farm is like. The answers to these questions do not have one single correct answer. In reality, there are innumerable correct ways to raise animals depending on the animal's breed and job. Cattle raised for dairy production versus cattle raised for beef production. Size, location, climate, facility staff, goals of the farm, and several other factors. What remains the same across all farms is that farmers care about the animals they raise and want animals thriving. One way to ensure animals are in a positive state of welfare is to use the 5 freedoms as benchmark for meeting animals' needs. To understand the importance of the 5 freedoms and why they were developed, let's turn back to 1964 when Ruth Harrison, a British woman, wrote Animal Machines. The book described intensive livestock and poultry farming practices of the time. The outcry of the British public regarding the information in the book prompted the British government to appoint a committee to look into the welfare of farm animals. In 1965, the committee, chaired by Professor Roger Bramble, presented the 85-page report of the Technical Committee to inquire into the welfare of animals kept under intensive livestock husbandry settings, which became known as the Bramble Report. In summary, the report stated that animals should have the freedom to stand up, lie down, turn around, and groom themselves and stretch their limbs. These freedoms became known as Bramble's 5 freedoms and were expanded on to create a more detailed list of the needs. The Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Committee was created in response to Bramble and colleagues' report to monitor the livestock production sector. In 1979, the name was changed to the Farm Animal Welfare Council, now Committee, and by the end of the same year, the initial 5 freedoms had been co-defined into the format below. The welfare of an animal, which includes its physical and mental states, how it is coping with its environment, and involves human experiences and ethics to evaluate animal welfare through observation and interpretation of an animal's behavior and health status. The co-defined 5 freedoms are as followed. Freedom from hunger and thirst, by ready access to fresh water and a diet to maintain full, healthy vigor. So freedom number 1, obviously, you got to make sure your dog is hydrated and that they are fed.
Yes.
Agreed, right?
I heard that.
2, freedom from discomfort by providing an appropriate environment, including shelter and a comfortable resting area. Obviously, as I'm already getting into this, I could see how this easily can be misinterpreted to a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
Like they're obviously talking about here by providing an appropriate environment, including shelter and a comfortable resting area. So freedom of discomfort, I interpret this as they intended that it's a safe and comfortable shelter that they can be in, right? Yeah. Freedom from pain, injury, and disease by prevention of or rapid diagnosis and treatment. So again, this also, as you could assume
Yeah.
would be misinterpreted.
Very much so.
But basically what they're implying is that the animal is healthy, right? We're making sure that if we notice the dog is in pain, has some sort of health issue, joint problems, things like that, we're solving those, right?
Yep.
4, freedom to express normal behavior by providing sufficient space, proper facilities, and company of the animal's own kind. So basically, let him be a dog.
Yeah.
Let him be a dog, right?
Yep.
But again, like the interpretation of what
Very
is
much
normal
so.
behavior, right? Like at what point, like aggression is a normal behavior, right?
Yeah.
Should they have freedom to rehearse that? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
freedom from fear and distress by ensuring conditions and treatment which avoid mental suffering. So obviously implying that the training methods are causing fear and distress. So you can't have that, obviously.
Yeah.
The 5 freedoms are used in the basis in writing animal care protocols and expectations for many professional groups, including veterinarians, as noted on the American Veterinarian Medical Association website. They've been adopted by representative groups internationally, including the World Organization for Animal Health and the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Most of the animal welfare audits developed for implementation on farms and in processing facilities are based on the 5 freedoms. The impact and use of the 5 freedoms is widespread across the world. An upcoming article from Michigan State University will focus on recognizing how animal caregivers, especially youth in animal science projects, use the 5 freedoms every day in caring for animals. My issue with this, right? Like, this is great, obviously. This should be something we should strive for.
Very much so.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Right? Like 100%, 100,000% agree. The problem is this was created initially for livestock, right?
Yeah.
Not for domesticated dogs that are living in homes.
Yeah.
Right? And we could argue all day long that, you know, freedom to express normal behavior, being locked in a house is not a normal behavior for an animal.
No.
Right? So this is where you draw the line of like, at what point do we say the whole lives that we keep our animals within are unnatural to begin with? So their normal behavior doesn't fit into this unnatural box.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And the amount of interpretations to like make that work for the study we just read. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really stretching to make it like fit with it, you know?
Yes. The 5 domains of animal welfare. Let's see if there's something quick on this. Yeah, this is real quick. We'll just read. So this evolved into the 5 domains of animal welfare. In 1994, Professor David Meller and Dr. Cam Reed proposed a new model to think about animal welfare and its assessment. The 5 domains model of animal welfare was most recently updated in 2020 and is increasingly used globally when considering the lived experiences of animals in human care. This approach allows for consideration of both negative and positive experiences that arise from physical and functional factors, which affect the overall mental state and welfare of the individual animal. Over the past 20 years, this paradigm has been widely adopted as a tool for assessing the welfare impacts of research procedures, pest animal control methods, and other interventions in animals' lives. The 5 domains explores the mental state of an animal in detail and acknowledges that for every physical aspect that is affected, there may be an accompanying emotion or subjective experience that may also affect welfare. This is used in terms of reinforcing the message that mental experiences are equally important as physical vitality for animals to thrive. One of the most important strengths of the 5 domains is the clarity it provides that merely minimizing or resolving negative physical or mental states does not necessarily result in positive welfare, but may only provide, at best, a neutral state. To have a good life, one where positive welfare experiences are enjoyed, animals need more than this. To help ensure animals have a good life, they must have the opportunity to have positive experiences, such as anticipation, meaningful social connection, satisfaction, and satiation. To enable this, those responsible for the care of animals need to provide them with opportunities for interaction with their environment, people, and other animals that not only allow but encourage animals to make choices and express behaviors that are rewarding to them. This shift in understanding is the basis for the 5 domains model incorporating positive welfare states. Thus, the 5 domains provide a comprehensive and structured way of considering the well-being of an individual or group of animals in a particular situation, with a strong focus on positive mental experiences. The 5 domains also allow us to extend our thinking beyond the historical 5 freedoms of animal welfare to place even greater emphasis on encouraging positive experiences and recognizing the emotional needs of individual animals in addition to minimizing negative experiences. Obviously, no fucking issue with any of this.
Yeah.
No issue with any of it. Right? I don't really have any, especially since there's no like details on like these are good models to try to follow, right? Yeah. And this goes hand in hand with something we talked about at the end of the last episode, which was the client I was working with that was struggling with the walking because he was just so wound up, right? That is a dog that did not have enough opportunity to have. Where is it here? Yeah, like he did not have enough opportunity to provide him or being provided to him of opportunities for interaction with their environment, people, and other animals that not only allow but encourage animals to make choices and express themselves that are rewarding to them. Instead, he was just asked to contain it, right? Yeah. So that is an animal that this is even more important for him, right? So yeah, I agree completely with this. That was just a really quick little article of it. There's like a full study that maybe we'll do next time that I see here that's fairly long that actually gets into obviously all of these domains. Yeah, I'll see if I can find a way. Here's the PDF. Man, I'm a PDF guy now. Give me the fucking PDFs.
All these studies.
I'm feeling so scientific.
I know.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. We'll print this out for next time.
We've been really nerding out the last few.
Yeah.
That's okay though.
Oof, 24 pages on this one. That'll be a good one for next time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we got. We learned a little bit together. We learned a little bit about life. We learned a little bit about the 5 freedoms, and we'll learn a little bit about the 5 domains next time.
Perfect.
So keep it going. Take away from today, obviously, continue to find appropriate outlets for you. Focus on those. We get hung up on the training side of things a lot.
Yeah.
We get hung up on the make sure the dog isn't doing the things we don't want them to do side of things a lot. But if we want to be as balanced as we can be, we have to put just as much focus on that.
Very true.
So we'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right.
See ya.
See ya.